I stand calmly in the center of the hall, waiting for Ezra to make a move. At this moment, Ezra is holding a slingshot, ready to strike. In an instant, several iron pellets whistled through the air. Indeed, a 16 or 17-year-old boy can't stay calm. I casually flicked away the incoming iron pellets, leaving only the clashing of gold and iron. There were a few clangs on the ground as several round iron pellets landed at my feet. I saw Ezra's face full of shock. I couldn't help but laugh. If it's just this level, I'm afraid even the little kids in the mountains, who hunt wild chickens, could become thieves with such limited skills. Ezra raised his neck, snorted coldly, and drew out a hook rope from behind. He then threw it onto the beam, pulled the rope 3 times, kicked the column twice, and leaped onto the beam, hiding on the dark roof. I looked up and gazed above. The light on the ceiling was dim. Ezra was dressed in black again. I couldn't see his figure at all, but I knew he must be silently looking for my flaws, waiting for the right moment to strike. My ears twitched slightly. In the faint sound, a bead hit the back of my head. I quickly drew my sword to defend myself. After a soft sound, I found that the force of this bead hitting me was much weaker than before. I looked in the direction where the bead flew. I found a dent on the pillar. Bounced off? At this point, my body suddenly alerted. I quickly swung the sword. The cold blade skimmed past my ear. Ezra's sword fiercely struck mine, creating a burst of sparks. But the long-awaited blow was intercepted by my sword as I dodged to the side. Seeing that the attack failed, Ezra quickly retreated, and then turned his head to stare at me. I look at him casually and say, "Actually, swordsmanship is just average. No matter how mysterious you make it sound, you can't escape being quick, accurate, and fierce. Just like your slingshot. But your divided focus has caused you to lose accuracy. Combining sword and slingshot actually diminishes the power." Ezra immediately became angry upon hearing this. He stomped his foot and said, "Taoist, where do you come up with all this nonsense? I am definitely not going to." Humph. Next, Ezra's attack was as fierce as a tide. But in my opinion, it's more threatening to hide on the beams and shoot a crossbow. Back and forth, I'll just play along with him. I'm even a bit distracted. Young people have strong self-esteem. They can't stand being looked down upon or lectured. And Ezra is especially arrogant. He was immediately angered, his neck turning red. His eyes seemed to be spitting fire. He covered his head and fiercely thrust a sword forward. I raised the long sword and thrust it forward as well. My sword tip was right on Ezra's sword handle. Ezra's long-awaited strike was then intercepted by my whimsical sword. He flew back once again, raised his head, and glanced at my sword. He then lowered his head to look at his own sword, eyes filled with disbelief. I turned around slowly. I scratched my nose and smiled, saying, "Let's call it quits here. What do you think?" "Taoist, where are all these idle words coming from? If you can beat me, then talk." Ezra yelled loudly, then stomped his foot, and once again lunged towards me. Very well, hearing this, I became serious. I moved like a wandering dragon, traveling in all directions. At times, I am light and agile like a swallow, rising with a sword pointed. At times, I am sudden like lightning. I thought to myself, oops, in my heart. I just struck too hard. So I quickly helped Ezra, who was about to fall. I unconsciously looked into my arms. I found something slightly surprising. Although Ezra had a rough yellow face, the skin on his neck was white and tender. There was a noticeable contrast between the skin on his face and neck. Forget it, just consider him as weather-beaten and disfigured. Don't move. If you move again, I'll give you a new eyeball. At this moment, the Ezra in his arms unknowingly gripped a slingshot. The rubber band was already pulled taut. A steel ball was ready to be launched. I lowered my head to take a look. I suddenly glanced at the slightly bulging chest, wrapped in thick white cloth. I couldn't believe it. My heart skipped a beat. Immediately raised both hands high above my head. I then slowly said, "This time you win." Ezra pointed to himself and asked, "Did I win?" I nodded helplessly. I only saw his originally fierce expression. In a moment, her demeanor changed to joy. She suddenly turned her head and looked at me steadily. Then she threw the slingshot in her hand towards me. "Taoist, this slingshot is for you." Hearing this, I quickly reached out and caught it. Eventually, Ezra hummed a little song, proudly running towards the door. I looked down at the slingshot in my hand. It was inlaid with gold and silver. Well, it's clearly valuable. Ah! Suddenly came a faint sigh from beside me. I glanced sideways and saw Old Monk holding a hook rope, descending from the ceiling beam. This old guy had been hiding up there all along. It's really a direct continuation of the same tradition. Old Monk shook his head and sighed. "I never expected even the Taoist to be deceived by that evildoer scheme. Now, no one can stop him anymore." Hearing this, a rare smirk appeared on my face. Then I weighed the slingshot in my hand and casually tossed it into Old Monk's arms. "It's a gift for you." Old Monk looked at the slingshot in his hand and muttered, "This is Ezra's." I looked at Old Monk indifferently with the back of my head and said lightly, "In this world where demons run rampant, what difference does it make to have one more petty thief?" Old Monk looked at my back for a long time in silence. After a long while, he let out a sigh and said, "Taoist, please all audience, like, favorite, and subscribe. Thank you. Thank you." The next morning, in the side hall, the distant sounds of bells broke the silence in the mountains. The morning bell accompanied the morning glow. What a picturesque scene of a secluded temple in the mountains. I walked into the hall. The bodhisattvas on both sides of the side hall have taken their places. Such compassion from the compassionate ones. Such stern gazes from the wrathful ones. The Tathagata Buddha sat with a gentle smile and lowered brows. The plaque has also been changed back to, "May the Buddha's light shine upon us all." Overnight, the bandit's den turned back into a monk temple. The world is indeed full of strange and wondrous things. The old monk saw me and hurried over to greet me. "Amitabha, the Taoist has woken up." I smiled and couldn't be bothered to pretend. I directly said I came to bid farewell. The old monk gave some instructions to the monks. Then he clapped his hands. Two bandits with shaved heads and branded with scars from their vows came forward, carrying a large box. "Yesterday my son caused some trouble. I have prepared a gift for the Taoist as an apology." The young monk carried the box and placed it next to the old monk. He casually opened it. I leaned in for a closer look. His expression suddenly became strange. Old Monk looked at me, and his expression suddenly changed. He immediately put on a gloomy face and summoned the man carrying the box over. "What's going on? Where's the silver I prepared?" The man carrying the box had a mournful expression on his face. He approached Old Monk and said in a low voice, Ezra seems to have been here this morning." Old Monk listened, his expression shifting from annoyance to realization, and then to confusion, much like the ever-changing clouds in the mountains. Although this demeanor may seem complex when described, it is actually quite common. Whenever a parent hears that their child has gotten into trouble again, they often show this expression. Old Monk scratched his head awkwardly and said, "Please wait a moment, Taoist. Let me prepare another one." Upon hearing this, I did not respond, but instead fell into contemplation as I gazed at the box. Then I casually took out a Dragon Jade Divine Talisman and held it in my hand. The talisman in my hand suddenly burst into flames. Then I sniffed lightly with my nose, nodding and saying, "Indeed. The scent in this box is a mix of scents. It is very similar to the smell in the cave kiln on Serpent Head Mountain. It is indeed the smell of the spider demon. Where did this come from?" I turned to Old Monk and asked. "This is famous silk nowadays. It is said that this fabric is woven into pure white color. It doesn't get dusty, nor does it get wet, and it is very durable. But when worn on the body, it is as light as nothing. Even the officials in the city want to present this fabric to the emperor as a tribute. I quickly interrupted old monk's endless chatter. How could a robber who steals things turn into a salesman as soon as he opens his mouth? I am asking where this thing comes from. Minion standing next to me immediately stepped forward. This material comes from J County. There is a J County under the jurisdiction of M City. This J County used to be very poor. The land couldn't grow good crops. They could only give away their daughters in marriage, but couldn't bring daughters-in-law in from outside. But it's said that in the mountains of J County, a weaving maiden suddenly appeared, bringing a celestial shuttle that weaved the evening clouds from heaven, which is how the cloud weaving and mist spinning began. Wait! I quickly interrupted Minion and asked, Mountain! Which mountain are you talking about? The man paused and replied, Wild Mountain. In M City, there is a mountain where a giant spider has appeared. It's very fierce and has eaten up all the nearby little demons. I secretly thought of the weaving maiden. It looks like I need to go to J County to see the weaving maiden for myself. I declined old monk's offer to accompany me and left the temple gate, leading the mule by myself. After descending the mountain, I made several turns in different directions. Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound appeared by my ear. Could it be that old monk is acting treacherously? I lifted the scabbard lightly. The object flying through the air was deflected by it, and landed right on the donkey's forehead. An iron bead rested on a tuft of hair that was spinning. I sighed softly, feeling a headache. In the blink of an eye, a handsome horse stepped out from the side of the road. Sitting on its back with a smile, let's just call him the young man for now. Taoist, I heard you are going to J County. Little lad, if you want to go to J County, then go. I am somewhat helpless. Why follow me, the Taoist? The horse took small steps closer. Besides Ezra, there is a large bag of luggage on the horse's back, making its steps heavier. He looks like he's about to go on a long journey. I have a bad feeling about this. I just nodded along nonchalantly. I'm also going to J County. Ezra seemed a bit absent-minded, staring ahead into the empty space. Father still refuses to acknowledge me, always saying I'm too inexperienced and lacking in skills. This time I'm going to J County for the celestial shuttle in the hands of the weaving maiden. Halfway through the conversation, I felt something was amiss. Hastily, I raised my hand to indicate that since things were this way, I wished you success in your endeavors. Let's go our separate ways, and hope to meet again in the future. I had already ridden the donkey for over 100 steps. Ezra was still standing his horse in the same spot. I just breathed a sigh of relief when suddenly I heard a series of urgent horse hooves behind me. I knocked on the donkey's head. Why are you so slow, you stupid donkey? The donkey looked wronged and stared at its owner with big eyes, as if to say, I'm just a donkey. The horse galloped quickly. In no time, it caught up with the donkey. Ezra just rode the horse silently. After a while, he spoke slowly. From a young age, my father didn't like me learning his ways. But I insisted on it and learned quickly. One day, my father told me he wanted to retire, and I told him I wanted to become a great thief. A notorious thief known throughout the world. He didn't agree, but I refused to comply. Later, he found many people to try to make me give up. But all those people were not my match. Ezra said here, lifting his chin, proud like an unfurled peacock. Until father's most powerful younger uncle lost to you. I knew he would definitely find you to compete with me. I wasn't worried at that time. I was just happy, thinking that as long as I beat you, father will change his mind. Taoist, did I really win? Ezra turned to look at me. His voice was somewhat low. I nonchalantly nodded. Won. Actually, I didn't care at all in my heart. I was even less interested in the ins and outs of bandits' families. Ezra stared at me blankly. His eyes were full of confusion. But my father said I won unfairly. But isn't winning just winning? I just smiled. Ezra was infuriated by this response. He drew his sword from his waist and shouted, I admit defeat. You indeed have the upper hand in swordsmanship. Yet it's simply because you rely on a longer sword than mine. This sword is 7 inches longer than the one I used yesterday, and 3 inches longer than yours. This time, I will definitely make you accept defeat wholeheartedly. Ezra placed the sword horizontally in front of his body. He assumed a fighting stance. This is indeed a rare and excellent sword. I shook my head, too lazy to explain further to him, urging the donkey to run. I left Ezra alone in the wind, looking disheveled. Fool, it's not about the length of the sword. How can one determine superiority based on the length? Moreover, a swordsman uses the sword. The length of the sword must be determined by the length of the body and arms. One must have a clear understanding of the length and balance of the sword. Winning is impossible. Instead, one might lose even faster. The expression on the face of the God of Heaven has always been unpredictable. Heavy rain poured down without any warning, creating a thick curtain of rain. Unknown_0 trapped people in a small shed. It's all you. Instead of following the main path, you insist on taking detours. There wasn't even a shelter along the way to hide from the rain. I glanced at Ezra. Who told you to follow? Now it's becoming my problem. Because Ezra stubbornly followed behind, I simply took a shortcut. I deliberately chose the most desolate path, hoping to make her realize the hardships of walking and that she would behave herself. At the very least, she wouldn't follow me anymore. Who knew? Ezra didn't change her mind. Unexpectedly, a sudden downpour caught us off guard while we were on a mountain path. Unable to find a place to take shelter from the rain, we ended up getting drenched for half an hour until we found this thatched cottage. I took off my soaked shirt casually and hung it to dry on the side. I looked up and saw Ezra right now, his back facing me, huddled in the corner. His hands were embracing himself, seemingly trembling lightly. And the large luggage next to him showed no signs of being opened. I knew in my heart that unknown_1 unknown_0. I searched around the grass hut for a while, and found a straw rain cape that was about to fall apart, and put it on. I might have to spend the night in this house tonight. I'll go out and look for some firewood unknown_1. After saying that, I stepped into the rain unknown_1. The moment I stepped out, the yellow seemed to have faded a lot. About half an hour later, the rain eased up slightly. However, the daylight darkened a bit more. I carried the dry branches I picked up and returned to the front of the cottage. I cleared my throat softly twice. I'm coming in. No fair play. I was faced with a bright sword light. I was so scared that I quickly threw the dry branches over. What are you doing? I looked at Ezra with a confused face. I said we were going to have another match. Now that we're trapped by the mountain rain, what else can we do besides a sword fight? The conversation was not finished yet, and Ezra struck with another sword. Let's have another match. Continuous sounds of chopping and clashing came from the small room. I quickly shouted, Stop! Please stop! Be careful. This thatched hut is not sturdy. The hut is probably used by hunters or woodcutters for resting in the mountains. It has been abandoned for a long time. The supports inside the hut are rotten in many places. Ezra simply does not listen to advice. He still kept attacking me without any regard. I secretly thought to myself, no wonder he left home so casually. This stubborn girl is really unyielding. I will change the guard of the sword in my hand from blocking to a light thrust, forcing Ezra to retreat. I immediately rushed out of the door. In the end, I didn't forget to take the little donkey with me. Ezra shouted loudly at the sight. Unknown_1 unknown_0. Don't escape unknown_1 unknown_0. I ran even faster at the words. I'll really die if I don't escape, I'll really die. The rooftop appeared to stagger like a drunkard. After swaying twice, it collapsed with a bang. Ezra clenched his small fists tightly, standing in the middle of the ruins, looking slightly disheveled as he said, "Such bad luck." The horse standing beside us looked at us with a resentful expression. I hurriedly covered the little donkey with big white teeth, suppressing a smile as I asked, "Can we not fight for now? Let's find a place to take shelter from the rain first, okay? What else are we looking for?" He wiped his face. His hands were covered in rainwater and bits of grass. Immediately, he pointed behind him. "Isn't there a ready-made spot right there? You didn't see it just now when you went to pick up firewood." I'm learning to be like Ezra. I expressed that I saw it. "But there's no one in the village." Ezra pinched his waist, looking at me as if I were a fool. "Isn't it just fine that there's no one here?" I pondered for a moment, then scratched my head in agreement. "Yeah, let's go." Then the corner of my mouth subtly curved upwards. It's just right to let him know. This world is cruel. There are more than just the official bureau and the bandits. Please, all viewers, give a like, favorite, and subscription. Thank you very much. The village is even more dilapidated than imagined. It used to be hidden behind heavy rain curtains, making it hard to see clearly. Approaching now, one is only then struck by the realization that within this village, one sees either dilapidated houses or collapsed walls. Wood rots, mushrooms sprout, walls are washed by rain, and mud water drips down. "Oh no!" Suddenly a startled cry came from behind. Upon hearing this, I quickly turned around to look. Ezra stood there with a straight face. There was a dry human skeleton lying beneath his feet on the muddy water. Only the skull flew out far away. I remained silent. I walked over to pick up the skull. I smiled and looked at Ezra. "Are you scared?" Then I put the skull back in my arms, turned around, and continued walking towards the village. Ezra stared at me blankly. Ezra defended with a stiff neck. "Afraid? Just a few dead people. I've seen battlefields before." In the end, perhaps he felt that it was not persuasive enough. "I have seen more dead people than you have seen living ones." "Is that so? Then you must have never seen. How could the living be afraid of the dead shell? What people fear is something beyond the shell. So we each go our separate ways to find a place to dwell." "Taoist. I found it." Ezra excitedly pointed at one, screaming over the good house. I carefully examined. This house is made of stone and tile. The thick door is tightly closed. The roof and walls are intact. It stands out conspicuously in the ruins. Heh! This Ezra does have a talent for being a master thief. With one move, he found the rightful owner. In just a moment of distraction, Ezra has already tied up the horse. Then he impatiently pushed the door open. Seeing this, the playful expression on my face became more pronounced. I pondered for a moment, chin in hand. I led the donkey to stand next to the horse. I patted the donkey's head. "Smart boy." It stuck out its tongue and let out a sound as a response. Maybe it was his first time running away from home. Everything looked fresh to him. Ezra kept looking around the room, unable to stop for a moment. But in reality, there was nothing special about the room. It was the village's ancestral hall with ancestral tablets placed on the altar in front. On both sides were some lamp holders, with the lamp oil having long dried up, leaving only brown stains. The only strange thing was a large stone platform in the center of the room, placed alone in the spacious hall, standing out oddly like the ancestral hall. Ezra walked up to the stone platform, clutching his waist, and said, "This platform is mine." Then he jumped on it directly and commented, "Not bad. Flat and the length is just right. Can be used as a bed." Ezra looked at me and said with a smile, "Taoist, looks like you can only sleep on the floor." A faint smile escaped from the corners of my mouth, almost imperceptible. In the end, I let out a sigh. I replied with a helpless tone, The round moon hung high in the sky, shining brightly like a clear mirror. The candid moonlight spilled onto the ground, as if veiled with a thin layer of gauze. Ezra. Ezra. Ezra suddenly opened his eyes wide. A handsome face was right in front of him. Ezra trembled. He was about to scream, but I covered his mouth with my hand. He saw that it was me. I raised a finger to my lips, gesturing for silence. Ezra stared at me blankly for a while. Then his lips trembled suddenly as he murmured, "You? How did you suddenly die?" "You just died. Even if it were me, it's hard not to find it somewhat amusing." I pointed around me. Ezra looked around as well. The lights on those lamp stands suddenly lit up, casting a ghostly glow in the room. Something doesn't seem quite right here. What are you staring at? Hurry up. Like, favorite, and subscription. Thank you very much. Thank you.